Yep. Okay. Maybe try and get the slides back to start, Nora. That's it. Okay. Okay. Anyway, welcome everyone. You can see myself and certainly James on screen. This will be a brief presentation on the Principal Designer Competency Framework and registration process. This is a CIAT competency framework. We based it upon the BSI, primarily BSI PASS 8671. Underpinned by 8670. So that's the criteria. You have to be a chartered member to be able to register. We don't allow any other way in. So that's completely exclusive to our chartered members. Okay, so anyway, a lot of this work was not developed specifically by me. Certainly James and Nora have had a huge input to creating the framework and the registration process. And also I'm grateful for the working group drawn from practices, certainly primarily in England and Wales, that have helped, because at the end of the day, this is a system that can only be judged by those in practice. I mean, I'm here to help set up a framework and set up the criteria for assessment, but it really is very much members judging members who undertake this particular function. So next slide, Nora. If you can manage. Yep. So anyway, as I said briefly at the introduction, the Principal Designer Competency Framework, we're very fortunate in a way that we have a kind of a document that we can refer to that was created by the British Standards Institute, a PASS 8671. A PASS is a public available specification. It has a degree of legality, but although it's not a legal document, it's more about a guidance document. But that is what we are using, and that's what the RIBA are using, that's what APS are using, and that's the only two other schemes I'm familiar with or know of that are developing a framework for competency for principal designers to be able to demonstrate their competence, particularly to clients. Certainly today we're going to give you sort of a brief insight in terms of the background, and particularly James will talk about how one can register to become a principal designer for Chartered Architectural Technologists. And there's two distinctions, and we've just drawn that from the legislation. They're basically principal designers for higher risk buildings and also for non-higher risk buildings. And that covers a huge range of building typologies, but we're sticking to what's written in legislation and in guidance, and we're not deviating from that. But at the end of the day, we all know that we tend to be competent in particular building typologies. And I know when I practiced many years ago now that my knowledge and skills and experience were in basically primarily hospital designs, and that's where I would have been specialising in if I was still practicing. Okay, next slide. And you know, as mentioned, the BSI have put in a lot of effort to create the framework. I'm on the competency steering committee for BSI, so I see not only these documents but other ones as well. I was involved in the certainly the expert panel for both 8670 and 8671. Again, it was breaking new territory with a lot of people, and hopefully this gives us a degree of comfort, certainly as an industry, that we've got some baseline standards that we can work to. But just to reiterate, the principal designer is an individual or company that takes on the role to assist a client and contractor in planning, monitoring, coordinating the designers and design work by taking reasonable steps to ensure that the design work is compliant with relevant requirements. So again, the words like what does reasonable mean? You know, what does relevant mean? And the other one that's not there is proportionate. So everything has to be set in context. But again, it's a minefield for everyone, and particularly the ones that you normally benefit from this kind of stuff is the legal profession, and that's the unfortunate consequence. But anyway, we are where we are with this, and that's what we're working to. So it's all about, you know, making sure that we can demonstrate our members have this baseline competence to be PDs. Okay, next one, Nora. And within the competency framework, I mean, if you look at 8670 in particular, there are 4 elements to competence. There are basically knowledge, experience, skills, and behaviours. But you know, for us, the main thrust for CIAT is about assessing the performance criteria. That is what somebody must be able to do, and how that's underpinned by the knowledge criteria about what you know and understand that informs the performance criteria. And again, these are just some kind of brief information about what is meant by competent, which I've mentioned already, and then the competence of individuals to be competent in terms of their ability to meet the performance criteria, and then competency or competencies, a set of knowledge, skills, and attributes, etc., etc. And then lastly, the competencies are a set of knowledge and skills and attitudes, etc., transformed into a number of elements and units that make up competencies. So the main thing for us is we work within that kind of pyramid approach. But we kind of focus very much on the high level, and we're not drilling down into the detail. We will obviously when one's been assessed, but the main thing is it's a high level criteria that we're looking at. Next one, Nora. So there's basically 4 elements within the PASS 8671, and you know, that's what we're using for our competencies. And we were starting off with behaviour at the top, because the industry came in for a fair bit of bad publicity and bad comment or good comment from Dame Judith Hackett, who thought basically a lot of the things that were wrong with the industry was people's behaviour and attitudes to working with others and being honest, etc., etc. So that's an important part of the behavioural competence. But in our case, we have the code of conduct that underpins our chartered membership, and we expect all our members to work in accordance with our code of conduct that sets out the behavioural aspects. The second one is more relating to the specifics in terms of what a principal design must be able to do, in terms of be able to apply legislation and regulatory frameworks related to how designers and design work is undertaken to ensure that he is compliant with all relevant requirements. What I will say at this stage is it's understanding there is a difference between the CDM regulations and the building regulations. The CDM regulations really focus on the operatives, the installers, the people that build or construct, and it's their health and safety that relates to the CDM. So something I refer to as really building as a verb. So it's that process of building or constructing, whereas this legislation is really about looking at the end user. That is the product, so it's the noun, building as a product, and how we as designers design that product to make sure that it's safe for occupancy and use. So it's quite different. And again, I think there's quite a few misunderstandings about the 2 pieces of legislation. Unfortunately, they use the same term, principal designer, and that's where the confusion arises. It also is confused by HSE and the building safety regulator being behind both. So that's where there's issues. But the main thing is really understanding the differences. You know, one is assessing risk in construction, the other one is assessing risk in use. So that's the differences. Okay, so next one, Nora. So the third and fourth components of the competency, again drawn from 8671, is how one manages design work compliance. So principal designers must be able to apply general principles of management to plan, design work compliance, and to manage, monitor, and coordinate designers and design work in relation to compliance during the design phase of a project. So that's the kind of job that probably many of you will do anyway. And it's, as we all know, nowadays it's very rare that you actually get a job where there's only one designer designing the building in terms of it being compliant. You know, as one moves through the different types of buildings from non-HRBs into HRBs, you could end up with teams of people who would be part of that team. The principal designer would have to make sure that they manage, monitor and coordinate the designers and the design work to make sure it's compliant during the design phase of the project. And again, going back to two, making sure it meets the regulatory requirements as well. And then lastly is the technical framework for compliance. And within this, it's really drawn upon more from BSI Flex 8670, and that's now a British standard. So it's now BS 8670. So all competency frameworks must have the core criteria for building safety relating to building design, general principles of construction. So again, if you're a chartered member, one would expect that you have the knowledge and experience to demonstrate that you are compliant to meet the technical framework requirements. So that's really it. It's quite simple, quite straightforward. So making sure that the four elements, the behaviours, the regulatory framework, management design work, and the technical work is all in one. And that's what we must make sure that our members who practice, who offer services to clients, who offer this particular role, then that's what we are here to do in terms of an institute. Next one, Nora.
Good, Sam.
Anyway,
so I think this is where I come in.
Yep.
That's the one. So thanks to Sam there for giving the overview and insight on where we've come from and how we've got to the point about registering as a PD with CIAT. In the chat, I've put a link to the framework, which was published last Thursday. Everyone that attended should have also been sent a copy of this. So the framework's there for you to get an idea and a gist and a flavour of what the relevant outputs and requirements are for registration for the respective strands. The candidate guidance notes and the relevant application form. So there's going to be an application form for non-HRB, an application form for HRB, and an application form to transition from non-HRB to HRB in time. So there'll be 3 application forms and you need to choose the applicable one for the registration or registrations that you're applying for. They'll all be on the website for the 1st of May because that's when the register officially launches. But the eligibility or mandatory requirements for registration is your qualification must be that you're a Chartered Architectural Technologist with us to have a current membership to enable you to submit an application for registration. So if you haven't got that qualification yet, you will need to attain chartered membership before you consider putting in an application to register as a PD. But through the process, so competency frameworks mean that you're going to need to provide a portfolio of evidence demonstrating your project-based experience to corroborate your suitability and competence to meet the requirements for registration. And that is a necessary output for HRB or non-HRB registration. And moreover, you'll need to demonstrate your knowledge and understanding against the criteria defined within the framework to meet the criteria for registration. So we've worked with the steering group to get us to this point with the framework, and we tried to give you a steer as to what potential types of evidence you could potentially provide for registration. So things we might want to see from you could include meeting minutes, emails, letters, review and drawings and documentation, RFI trackers, change control information, managing conflict, stakeholder engagement, evidence of statutory compliance. You'd envisage this is the day-to-day outputs that you're delivering as a Chartered Architectural Technologist. And that list is by no means exhaustive. It's just to give you a flavour of what you could consider providing, as long as you can justify the relevance in relation to the role and the requirements within the framework. So next slide, please, Nora. So yeah, for non-HRB registration here, there's a bit more of a detailed breakdown of the types of evidence you could potentially provide. Again, this is not a list of you must provide one and all of these. It depends on the project, your roles and responsibilities, and what you can provide to show CIAT that you're competent in those specific functions. So again, this is to give you an easy to digest flavour of the performance evidence or the performance requirements that you're going to need to put into your portfolio that would demonstrate the performance requirements of the competency framework. So this is the list for non-HRB registration, and this guidance is embedded within the competency framework as well. And if you move on to the next slide, Nora, that will give you a flavour of the additional evidence over and above that you would need to potentially consider providing for registration as a PD on HRBs. Now, having gone through the pilot and testing stage of the framework and done a review with the peers that helped us develop this criteria. There are some facets within the evidence list here that might not have happened in reality for many, if any, in practice. So we'll be pragmatic in our assessment process, as long as you contextualize and outline the relevance of the evidence and provide a narrative for the panel to get a judgment of where you are and what stages you're going through. But again, these should be bullet points that resonate with you, that are easy for you to digest and consider how and what you could provide to demonstrate competence for registration. And again, we're not saying this is a definitive list of anything you could put in. It's just to set off light bulbs or give you a signpost of what types of evidence you need to provide. Moreover, these slides or this presentation or webinar will be published on the Building Safety Hub in due course. So if you could move on to the next slide, please, Nora. So as I alluded to, there's an application for registration as a PD on a HRB. Now, if you get registration and meet the standard as a PD on a HRB, that would automatically give you dual registration as a non-HRB PD as well, because you would have met the standards for non-HRB registration by getting your HRB registration. So there's a dual registration for some individuals. If you just choose to be a non-HRB PD, that's perfectly acceptable to us. And then moreover, in time, if you initially get non-HRB registration and you want to move on and get your HRB registration, there's 3 respective forms and processes to go through and criteria that you would need to demonstrate. But in essence, within the form, you need to provide a narrative outlining your knowledge and understanding, outlining project-based experience and giving context as to the project competency that you have, and then reference those documents to prove that you've met the standard. So by competence, we need to see documentary evidence to prove you've met that specific criteria or the criteria within the application. And once you're ready to submit with your form and all your supporting evidence, then you could submit that to pdregister@ciat.global. So that email will also go live from the 1st of May, but one would envisage you won't be able to submit an application because the forms aren't on the website. If you move on to the next slide, please, Nora. So the fee for registration as a PD on a HRB, so that's your application and assessment, is £350. So that's going to be a desktop assessment of your portfolio against the criteria, as well as a professional interview to get your registration as a PD for a HRB. The non-HRB application and assessment fee is £200, but that is a desktop assessment of your application and your portfolio against the criteria with no professional interview. Moreover, if you want to move between the 2 registrations for the transition of non-HRB to HRB, it's a refined application, it's evident, and it's an interview. But that fee will be £150 to make that step. And those fees are set for this subscription year. So that's the 1st of May 2024 to the 30th of April 2025. Now, the good news that some of you may well perceive it is the executive board at the Institute, as well as all key staff, have decided in year 1, until we determine the baseline cost to us for administering this register, we will charge no subscription for your registration. Okay, so you have to pay the application and assessment fee, you have to pay your chartered or fellow membership subscription, but for PD registration, we won't charge you a subscription in the forthcoming year. But there will be a subscription due from the 1st of May 2025 once we've determined the cost to us to administer the register. And as I alluded to on the last slide, if you've got HRB registration, it would lead to dual registration. Now, regarding the application forms, a bit of guidance I can give you is if you're applying for HRB, you're going to get 3,000 words plus or minus 10%. If you're applying for non-HRB, you're going to get 2,000 words plus or minus 10%. And if you're going for the transition from non-HRB to HRB, you're going to get 1,000 words plus or minus 10% to address the additional criteria. That's pretty much where we are with it. Hopefully that gives you a good overview. I can see a few comments popping up in the chat box. And again, there are 200 of you in the room. So we're happy to try and field some of these queries, and we're happy to take potentially verbal questions from the floor. But if you've got a specific query related to you individually, can you please just email Nora and myself directly in the first instance so that we can field those and provide you a specific response. There are some frequently asked questions published on the website, but I suppose at this point I can try and run through some of the queries. So if you're saying some of your evidence that you use for your chartership seems to tick some of the criteria and you qualified quite recently, yes, you could use the same evidence, but you'd need to justify it and repurpose it in line with the PD application process and criteria. Evidence-wise, we'd like a WeTransfer application ideally. We're not accepting Dropbox at the moment. So it'd be WeTransfer or another sort of big file transfer platform that would be acceptable. Regarding evidence, evidence is proficiency to comply with the regulations in England and or Wales. So therefore, I wouldn't necessarily say that overseas evidence would be applicable in relation to compliance with the expectations of the role in the regulations. I notice questions are popping up quite quickly here. Timescales, the most current evidence you can provide would be ideal. Ultimately, we do understand there's certain outputs of the PD that haven't necessarily come to fruition just yet, so you can only provide as best you can what aligns to the principal objectives of what we expect to see from you. So the more recent, the better, and obviously anything that complies with the currency of the regulations that you're working within. Regarding a matrix of evidence, so no, you don't need to provide a competency mapping list like you would for accredited conservationist, but embedded within your application form, when you address each of the competencies, you will need to provide a reference to documentation after each and every narrative that would be applicable. So that when we read the form, you read the A1 competency, then you see the documents right thereafter to show your suitability. There'll be a chartered subscription and there'll be a PD registered subscription. There'll be two separate standalone fees. PI insurance, you need to take that out of this chat and you'd need to email practice@ciat.global because they're dealing with anything related to PI. Separate designation, yes, you'll be called a CIAT principal designer and there'll be a logo that you can use on your signature strip and you'll also be listed on the website. To remain current on the register, there's going to be a 5-year reaccreditation process, and you will also have to retain your relevant subscriptions for CIAT and or your PD registration. Your post-nominal letters will not change. You'll be MCIAT or FCIAT and a Chartered Architectural Technologists, but you'll put CIAT Principal Designer. And I can breathe now. Yes, I understand the APS are open to non-members of APS or CIAT. That's up to the APS. We've decided the threshold benchmark entry requirement is Chartered Architectural Technology. So if you're not, there's no reason why you can't be. You just need to go through the professional assessment process, get your chartership, and then you can apply straight away to join the PD register.
Yeah.
Around standard appointment of templates, again, you probably need to speak to practice@ciat.global for them to give you an update, because that's not really Sam Nor or my remit. But we'd envisage we support members as much as possible to comply with the expectations of the role and the regulations. We won't be registering companies, we'll be registering individuals. So if you're an individual and you have a plethora of companies, as long as they're registered with CIAT, we would say you as the individual would be able to fulfill that role. Registration is optional. So we're advising it and we're recommending it. We're giving you access to it, but it is optional. So you don't need to necessarily legally be a registered PD, but it is one way of demonstrating competence, and that's what the regulations and legislation say. I'm not getting into debate around liability on the role. That's a separate debate that you can have with your peers. And yeah, Ross, just to clarify, your charter subscription is one fee you have to pay, and then there'll be a PD subscription that you need to pay. Same if you're a accredited conservationist or a chartered environmentalist, there's separate individual fees. It's not going to be rolled up in one. It's going to be 330 to be chartered and then 120, as an example, off the top of my head, to be a PD. You can submit applications from the 1st of May once the form's on the website. So as soon as you've got it done and you feel we've addressed the criteria, then you can submit that to PD register at ciat.global.
Yeah. I mean,
and then again, evidence types as current as you can make it.
Yeah, I mean, I think
come in at any of these.
I think some of the stuff, James, give you a mouth a rest. But some of your projects will provide the knowledge evidence, but your performance criteria that's based really should be current, because remember, it's how you're able to undertake those activities. So it's about like, like a sport. I'll use my own case of being a footballer, or James a footballer. You have to continually play the game. So this is about being able to play the game. So it really is, you need to have current projects to demonstrate the competence. But you can go back in time to demonstrate you've got that underpinning knowledge, and you know about the technical requirements, etc. But the actually application of the regulatory stuff, you're really looking for some degree of currency.
Yeah, and then just someone's asking about the professional interview for HRB registration. So they're all going to be remote unless there's a reasonable adjustment that we need to make. And moreover, it will cover the range and scope to ensure that you're proficient to fulfill the role as a PD on HRB. So it'll be aligned to the competency framework and the criteria within that, as well as the evidence and the narrative you put within your application. The RIBA PD course may well help you demonstrate some of the knowledge and understanding if you can relate what they've delivered to you and how it relates to our criteria. But one would envisage that a course or CPD would not provide performance evidence because it's not an output of an experience that you've delivered on a project. The individual, so we register the individual member to be the PD. We're not registering organisations or companies. So you, Ivan Walsh, MCIAT, we would say you're a registered principal designer, but we wouldn't say that your business or organisation is registered. You're the proficient, competent individual within that business. And then Jess's question about the short course is quite new to everybody. It hasn't launched just yet. So as it embeds and evolves over time, then there may well be some courses. So if other people in the background, their mic's not on mute, could you do it, please? So at this stage, there's not going to be a short course per se, but there may well be in time. So Des's question about all buildings. So yeah, the PD relates to all buildings, just depending on the definition of HRB or non-HRB. That's where the differential is really in the regulations. And again, any guidance documents, we probably best need to liaise with practice at CIAT.global on that one, because that would be their remit. Nora and I are looking at standards and registration, should we say, but we envisage some guidance will be coming out in due course. But everybody's learning as we go, as we found out in industry. Evidence-wise is as much as you need to provide, but it needs to be concise and succinct and to the point. We don't need multiple different examples of the same thing. We need to see contextualized evidence demonstrating the outputs against a specific criterion. Timeframes, we're aiming at inception for 28 working days, but if we get an avalanche of applications, then obviously we might have to review where we are, but we're aiming for 28 working days for a decision around either registration as a PD for non-HRB or potentially being passed to professional interview for HRB. Again, you'll have to keep an eye on that, and we'll communicate with you accordingly if those timeframes move. Yeah, some of these questions about PI and MFL, you're going to have to raise with practice at CIAT.global. We are aware of this, and we are in discussions with MFL. And my understanding is there may be a scenario where you automatically become the PD based on how it's currently written. So again, you need to look at your liabilities of that. But there's an awful lot of questions here. Standard templates, again, practice at CIAT.global could probably let you know where they are with that. Yeah, if you submit an application and it's not deemed acceptable, then there's sort of like a free opportunity to submit to pass your desktop assessment. So that's for non-HRB or HRB, say for chartership. So you get free applications of your narrative and your evidence to meet the criteria. But if you're going for HRB registration, you'd only get one professional interview. You see what I mean? And the fee, the 350 or the 200 covers those free portfolio reassessments. So Scott, to clarify the fees, HRB registration, £350, portfolio review and interview, HRB registration, £200, portfolio review, and the subscription is £0 for the next forthcoming subscription year. Where are we at now? So yeah, evidence is just, yeah, however many projects you need to prove the points, it's like a pick and mix. It's up to you. Contextualize it, justify the relevance, provide the documents to tick the competencies. You can use as many or as few projects as you want. It's really up to you. Well, the only way for register competency of a PD, there's 3 industry-wide competency registration schemes now, and that was the way the institute has deemed that an individual can one way to demonstrate competence to act as a PD would be to qualify with CIAT. If you as an individual feel you can demonstrate competence another way, that's your prerogative, but we're facilitating the opportunity through a publicly available register, which we envisage a lot of people or a lot of stakeholders will be moving towards. They'll be looking for competent professionals on a register as time goes on. So the question of about guidance, again, you need to email practice@ciat.global about guidance and webinars and things like that about fulfilling the role. The competency framework shows you what you need to do to fulfill the role. That's the criteria. That's the standard. So in essence, you could just review the framework, and if you're doing that and you can evidence that, one would outline you're fulfilling the role of a PD. And then if successful at interview, I don't necessarily see that you would just get non-HRB registration as a de facto, because it just depends. You know, we used to have technician membership. Just because you didn't get chartership and you didn't pass your interview, we didn't then say, oh, you get technician. So I'd envisage it's unlikely that you get non-HRB registration for an unsuccessful interview. But if you're not confident to get the HRB registration, then in the short term, you should maybe go for non-HRB and move to HRB registration in due course when you feel suitable and competent.
Yeah. I mean, James, it really depends on the buildings you're working on, building typology. So it's, you know, you know, if you're working on higher risk buildings, you're working on higher risk buildings. So, you know, that's it. And if you're working in non-HRBs, you're working in non-HRBs. So it's determined upon your sphere of work in terms of your design and your design practice. So, you know, if you're undertaking a PD role within HRBs, you should be able to demonstrate compliance with the competency framework. So, you know, it got to be positive, and again, the form is set out in such a way that, you know, we're looking at an overview from you or someone who's applying, just to contextualize the kind of work you do, your kind of experience, any kind of, you know, and that role and function, and then breaking down into the 4 areas of behaviour, regulatory framework, you know, design management, and technical underpinning. So if you can answer them in a simple narrative, then your evidence that underpins that is there for the assessor to look at. So, you know, there's no tricks to this. We you know, with competency or any kind of assessment that we hope we provide transparency for the applicant and the assessor. So we're all on the same page. So that's what we're trying to do. And I picked up also people looking for probably exemplars, and possibly over time we'll be able to do that. Currently, you know, we have to move fast, but hopefully we can give some more detailed guidance about the kind of volume of information that's required. But mainly, if you'll be able to see what's required once you start writing down what you're doing. I think the RIBA form was a bit clunky. They went straight in. They didn't ask what we were asking, so people were putting in avalanches full of information, because they didn't know how much they needed to put in. So we'll try and guide people eventually in terms of the volume we're looking for. Back to you, James.
Yeah, so there's a few more questions coming up. So one's for you, Sam, actually. Have you been informed that those not on the register in time might be potentially considered not competent because they haven't gone through the verification process?
Yeah, I mean that may well be the case. I mean, I'm working on quite a number of things with um, quite close to HSE and the BSR and the industry competency steering group. I'm on that, and there's kind of, you can see there's undertones there that might be the case, that if you don't register, you might not be able to demonstrate competence. But we're not saying that currently, but I think that's what may happen eventually. But if you were a client, and it's a client who is appointing the competent individuals, so it's important that we help you as members demonstrate competence. I did pick up, I saw something there about would this undermine the qualification of MCIAT? Well, it doesn't. It's just an additional way of demonstrating the additionality that a member has in practice to offer a particular service, and that's all we're really doing. So it's a bit like as someone said to me many years ago, it's a bit like your uniform if you're in the forces, maybe your regiment, then you have your stripes and badges on your arm, and that's what we're doing. And it's important you have those stripes and badges to show to a client that you're beyond what would be required to undertake a particular role as a chartered member.
Good. Yeah, so there's a few questions covered. So someone's asking about, oh, if I don't have experience on HRBs, how would I get the qualification or the registration? I'd argue you need the experience on HRBs. You need to be involved at that level. So you'd have to get that opportunity working with an employer, shadowing, mentoring, developing yourself. Because it's performance-based output, you can't get registration unless you've got the experience.
Yeah. I mean, you can demonstrate
similar for chartership.
Yeah, you can demonstrate the knowledge part. You can probably demonstrate the technical bits, but actually applying the regulatory bits and undertaking that role and function, you really have to work in that area. And that's the difference between someone saying, what's the difference between competence and qualified? Qualified doesn't mean competent. Competent doesn't mean qualified. So it's actually, it's about really being able to demonstrate that you can play the game. You can play the PD game, and that's that's the important thing. So it's not about just being able to talk about it. You must be able to do it and do it at an appropriate level. That's why I'm not involved in assessing anybody. I'm not a practitioner. This is assessed by peers who are qualified PDs who will be assessing you guys. So that's the whole thing. And I'd like to think over time that some of you who maybe applying could also become assessors. So it's really about you as a group determining that the standard. James, Nora, myself, we are here to facilitate, to monitor, to make sure we're meeting the criteria and make changes over time too.
Yeah, that's a good point by Sam. So yeah, at some point as people come through, we will be asking you to commit towards this endeavour to help us as assessors for those early individuals that get registration as competent PDs. A question about primarily work on hospitals and certain parts of the BSA don't apply, and only certain facets you can provide evidence of in relation to registration for a HRB. So if you can contextualise your application and you are involved in the areas of relevance in relation to your sphere of practice, and you can show how all of it's put together, and you can provide evidence of involvement at that level, albeit you say nearly all, so some of them might not be. I think there's a level of pragmatism to get registration early on, considering a lot of people may not have gone through Gateway 2 process, Gateway 3 process just yet in industry. So if you can align your evidence to the principal objectives of what that's trying to achieve, that should enable you to get registration. The application form is going through the final review stage, so it won't be available until the 1st of May, unfortunately, for people that were keen to get cracking. But, it's only next Wednesday. Questions around do we agree or disagree? I'm not really going to get into a debate on that on a recorded forum. But again, you can send your emails, queries to practice@ciat.global. There is going to be a standard form that you can download from the website around addressing your competency in relation to the criteria for registration. How you term that to your clients is up to you to consider, and it might be sensible to liaise with your employer. Reaccreditation 5 years down the line, I think we'll publish the fee for that in due course, because we're still trying to determine the cost to us around administering the register. I think that's just a sort of open-ended question there around how you envisage complying with the obligations of the role. The candidate guidance notes haven't been published yet because they're in final draft stage as well. So the only thing that's been published is the competency framework, so you get a flavour. But if you go to the performance evidence requirements for non-HRBs and HRBs, you can start to pull together evidence that you feel would show competency for registration. And then next week, you can embed that and contextualise that within the application form. You can begin starting your PD application form as soon as you feel you're ready. But obviously, the benchmark for entry has to be that you're a Chartered Architectural Technologist. So when it's all published next week, you can start putting together an application, even if you're not a chartered member. But you need to finish that upgrade qualification process for a chartership before you then apply. So I feel we've covered quite a few points here, and it might be a good time to propose to wrap this up and invite any questions outside of this forum to be directed via email for those of you who'd like to contact us. And also check the Building Safety Hub on the website for the application forms, for the guidance notes. It'll all be sent out and published in AT Weekly Thursday week anyway. So we're all moving in the right direction. We're all register. We're all ready for you to register. It's up to you to put together an application. So yeah, sanctions and compliance is being debated at the moment as to regards of what the obligations are under the code of conduct, because all CIAT members are bound by the code, and we just need to see the synergies between that and the obligations of a PD. And again, that question there is not really for this forum about registration. That'd be a question for practice at CIAT.global. Any technical or process, what if, what's the institute's view on this? That really needs to be sent in writing to practice at CIAT.global. This is not really the forum for us to come up with a response on those ones. But yeah, any questions, just ask. We're at your institute, we're here to help you. We're going on the same journey as you, and we're hopefully giving you a bit more of a steer on where that journey will take you. But we look forward to receiving some applications for chartership, and we look forward to getting you on the register, and we look forward to some of you helping us assess the next people through to become registered PDs. So thank you to Sam for all your endeavours. Thank you to Nora, and this will be published on the website as well as soon as possible. And any queries in the meantime, most of you have got Nora's and my details, so please send it our way. But if you want to find Sam on LinkedIn, I'm sure I'd be happy to link with you as well. It's